Let me ask you something. If you were dropped into the middle of the ocean during a storm, would you survive by constantly switching boats every time a wave hit? Or would you survive by learning how one ship handles rough water, how it turns, how it bends without breaking? That's trading. Most traders don't fail because the market is impossible. They fail because they never stay still long enough to understand what they're standing on. They jump from strategy to strategy like stepping stones in a river, wondering why they keep slipping under the surface. Today, we're talking about why having one trading strategy and following it with accuracy and precision is not a limitation, but your greatest edge. One of the first and most destructive traps beginners fall into is the belief that there is a perfect trading strategy somewhere out there, one that never loses, never experiences meaningful drawdowns, and produces effortless profits with every click of the mouse. This belief is fueled by impatience and unrealistic expectations about how markets actually function. After 2 or 3 losing trades, often well within normal statistical variance, new traders immediately assume something is fundamentally wrong. Rather than reviewing their execution, questioning their risk management, or recognizing that losses are an unavoidable cost of participation, they conclude that the strategy itself is broken. In response, they abandon it prematurely and rush toward the next shiny setup they saw online, hoping this new approach will finally eliminate uncertainty, discomfort, and emotional pain from the trading process. Social media platforms like Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter dramatically amplify this illusion. These platforms reward spectacle, not discipline. What dominates your screen are screenshots of oversized wins, perfectly timed entries at the exact top or bottom, and confident declarations that someone has finally cracked the code. What you never see are the losing streaks that preceded those wins, the months or years of drawdowns, or the thousands of trades required to refine execution and build consistency. You don't see the boredom, the self-doubt, or the countless small losses that were carefully controlled along the way. Social media showcases outcomes, not process. And that distortion convinces inexperienced traders that success should be fast, smooth, and painless, when in reality it is slow, uneven, and often uncomfortable. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Every trading strategy looks flawless in hindsight and broken in real time. Once a move has already happened, the setup appears obvious. But when you are inside the trade, uncertainty is unavoidable. Losses are not evidence that a strategy doesn't work. They are a required component of how any statistical edge expresses itself over time. An edge does not eliminate losses, it manages them. When traders constantly switch strategies, they never allow probability to do its job. They disrupt their sample size, invalidate their data, and erase any meaningful insight into expectancy, drawdowns, or performance. In doing so, they repeatedly cut off the edge before it ever has a chance to emerge. If you reset your strategy every time you feel pain, you don't just reset your trades, you reset your learning, your data, and your progress back to zero. An edge does not reveal itself in 5 trades, 10 trades, or even a handful of winning days. It only becomes visible over a large, statistically meaningful sample size, where randomness begins to smooth out and true probabilities emerge. In the short term, almost any strategy can look brilliant or completely broken purely by chance. That's why changing your rules every week guarantees confusion. You cannot build a reliable data set if the framework you're measuring keeps shifting each time you alter your entry, exit, stop placement, or position size. You reset the experiment, making it impossible to distinguish skill from luck. Consistency is what transforms random outcomes into measurable probability. By trading the same setup repeatedly, under the same conditions, you begin to learn its personality in a way no backtest or theory ever could. You start to recognize how it behaves when it's working well, how it typically fails, and how much heat it tends to take before resolving. You learn what a normal drawdown feels like versus an abnormal one, which market environments it thrives in, and which conditions quietly erode its effectiveness. Over time, uncertainty turns into familiarity, and familiarity breeds confidence grounded in data, not hope. Sticking to one strategy also allows you to track real, actionable metrics. Expectancy tells you whether the strategy is mathematically viable. Win rate shows how often you should expect to be right. Average loss defines how much pain you must tolerate to stay in the game. Drawdown tolerance reveals whether the strategy fits your psychology as much as your account size. Without consistency, these numbers are meaningless. Without them, you're not trading a system. You're reacting emotionally to noise and calling it decision-making. The edge isn't the setup itself. The edge is knowing, through repetition, data, and experience, exactly how that setup behaves over time. There's another benefit of committing to one strategy that most traders severely underestimate: psychological relief. Trading is already one of the most mentally demanding activities a person can engage in. You're operating in an environment of constant uncertainty, rapid feedback, and real financial consequences. When you layer that with the endless evaluation of new setups, indicators, time frames, and opinions, the cognitive load becomes overwhelming. Decision fatigue sets in long before the trading day is over. But when you commit to a single, clearly defined strategy, something powerful happens. Mental noise begins to disappear. The charts become quieter. The urgency fades. You're no longer glued to every tick, scanning frantically for something, anything, to trade out of fear of missing out. Overtrading naturally declines because you stop feeling obligated to participate in every market movement. You no longer chase every candle, every breakout, or every headline-driven spike. Instead, you wait with intention and patience. You know exactly what conditions must be present for your strategy to activate, and just as importantly, you know when to do absolutely nothing. This ability to ignore most of what the market is doing is not a weakness, it's a professional skill. By narrowing your focus, you conserve emotional energy and reduce the impulsive behavior that destroys accounts. Clear rules create clear decisions, and clear decisions dramatically reduce internal conflict. Entries stop being drawn-out mental arguments and become simple yes or no assessments. Either the setup is there or it isn't. Exits follow predefined logic rather than emotion, meaning stop losses are respected and profits are taken according to plan, instead of being sabotaged by fear, greed, or hope. You're no longer negotiating with yourself in real time, trying to justify why this trade might be different or why this loss shouldn't count. That exhausting internal tug-of-war, one of the biggest sources of stress and inconsistency for traders, gradually fades as your process takes control. This is how real confidence is built in the markets, not through prediction, bravado, or trying to be right, but through familiarity earned by repetition. You trust your strategy because you've lived through its full cycle. You've seen it fail, recover, draw down, and perform across dozens or hundreds of trades. You know what normal volatility feels like, what a standard losing streak looks like, and when something is truly out of character. Because of that familiarity, you stop panicking when variance shows up. You don't overreact to a single loss or a small streak of them. Over time, your emotional responses soften, your execution becomes cleaner, and your focus shifts away from individual outcomes toward consistent process. In the end, discipline isn't about forcing yourself to behave correctly in moments of stress or relying on raw willpower. It's about removing unnecessary choices so that the correct behavior becomes automatic, quiet, repeatable, and sustainable. Here's a hard truth that most traders resist for far too long. The majority of traders do not fail because they lack a good strategy. They fail because they consistently execute that strategy poorly. On paper, many approaches are perfectly viable. In practice, execution is where accounts are quietly destroyed. Late entries caused by hesitation or fear of missing out, early exits driven by anxiety, stop losses moved just this once, and position sizes taken too large in moments of confidence. These mistakes seem small in isolation, but they compound faster and more brutally than any losing setup ever could. One or two emotional decisions can undo weeks of disciplined work. This is why two traders can trade the exact same strategy in the same market under the same conditions and end up with completely different results. The difference isn't intelligence, market knowledge, or access to better tools. It's execution. One trader follows the plan precisely, accepting losses as part of the process. The other improvises under pressure, overrides rules, and lets emotions interfere at the worst possible moments. Over time, that gap widens dramatically. Consistent execution smooths outcomes. Inconsistent execution amplifies chaos. Professional traders understand this, which is why they don't obsess over constantly discovering new indicators, secret patterns, or complex systems. They know novelty doesn't create consistency, precision does. Instead, they focus relentlessly on timing, order placement, risk control, and repeatability. They rehearse execution until it becomes automatic. Every detail matters. Where the stop is placed, how much is risked, how entries are taken, and when trades are simply passed on. This is where real mastery lives. Not in the idea, but in the discipline required to execute it the same way, every time. A mediocre strategy executed with precision, patience, and emotional control will outperform a brilliant strategy executed inconsistently. A mediocre strategy executed perfectly beats a perfect strategy executed emotionally. Now, none of this means that markets are static or predictable. They aren't. Markets are living systems. Volatility expands and contracts, liquidity shifts, and conditions evolve as participants change behavior in response to news, macro events, and sentiment. What worked cleanly in one environment may feel slower or more erratic in another. But while surface conditions change, market structure remains. Price still moves through trends, ranges, breakouts, and reversals. Risk still behaves according to probability. Human behavior, fear, greed, hesitation, and overconfidence continues to leave the same footprints on the chart. This is where many traders misunderstand adaptation. Adapting does not mean throwing your strategy away the moment performance becomes uncomfortable. It does not mean constantly redesigning your rules in reaction to short-term drawdowns. True adaptation is subtle and deliberate. It means refining how you deploy your strategy, not abandoning the logic that gives it an edge. You might reduce position size when volatility increases, tighten your trade window to higher quality sessions, or add filters that keep you out of low probability environments. What you don't do is rewrite the core rules that define why the strategy works in the first place. When traders abandon their strategy during rough periods, it's rarely a data-driven decision. More often, it's fear disguised as logic. A small losing streak suddenly feels like failure. A drawdown feels personal. Instead of reviewing statistics or adjusting risk, they pivot emotionally, chasing new setups, changing indicators, or trading more aggressively to make it back. These panic pivots almost always compound the damage. Staying grounded in your rules creates stability when emotions are loud. It prevents overcorrection and keeps temporary discomfort from turning into permanent damage. Adaptation, when done correctly, is an act of discipline. It is measured, intentional, and supported by data. It respects the long-term edge while accounting for short-term conditions. Reinvention, on the other hand, is usually a reaction to pain. One preserves progress, the other resets it. At TP Trader, we believe success comes from doing less, but doing it with precision. One strategy, one process, executed accurately, repeatedly, and without emotion. The trader who masters one strategy will always outperform the trader who chases them all. If this video helped you see trading more clearly, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay disciplined. Because in the markets, clarity beats chaos, and precision beats hope.